Are you alive? Not just breathing, but truly, deeply alive? That is the question that anchors today's guest. And trust me, the way she has pursued this question is unlike any story I've ever heard. Today's guest is Eloise Skinner, who grew up in the UK, and she was raised by two parents who were both musicians. Music was literally in her DNA from the moment she arrived in this world. And yet, she didn't pursue music like her parents. And in an act of rebellion at the age of 16, she chose a completely different path. She chose corporate law and was Cambridge educated and Oxford trained. And then at the age of 26, she made a completely unconventional pivot and joined the monastery. Not for a weekend retreat, not for a yoga holiday. She immersed herself fully in poverty, in silence, in discipline, in rigor, all while she was practicing law. And what she found in that silence didn't break her. It built her. That experience became the foundation for everything that followed. And then came 2021, the Great Resignation. A moment the whole world seemed to pause and ask that question, wait, is this really what I want? Eloise was asking that question too. She was searching for balance. She was searching for purpose and meaning. And so she made another bold move, leaving law altogether to train as a psychotherapist with a focus in existentialism. And for those of you wondering what existentialism means, think of it this way. It's the philosophy that asks not, are you here? But are you really living? And that question became her life's work. Today, Eloise is an author, a therapist, a founder, and a teacher. A woman who has lived more versions of herself than most people dare to dream of. You guys are going to absolutely love this interview just as much as I did. So without further ado, please enjoy Eloise Skinner and her clocking out journey. Hi, Eloise. Welcome to the podcast. It's nice to see you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's such a delight. I have been looking forward to this conversation. I'm going to be honest, for probably, 3 or 4 weeks now, when I started to look at your background and really get to know you and your journey. I feel like there's so much intersection between the work that you're doing and the work that I'm doing with this podcast. And the one word that comes to mind is the word alive.
Mm-hmm. I love that.
Yeah. And when I was looking at your book and I was reading a couple excerpts of, but are you alive? That question to me struck me in a couple different ways. And when I first saw, but are you alive? The first thing that came to mind was Descartes' quote that is, I think, therefore I am. And that was just like the first reaction I had. But then as I started to unpack your book and the work that you're doing, I began to realize that his saying, I think, therefore I am, is really just around your existence. And, if the meaning of existing is, if you think, you exist. But the work that you're doing is taking it further and you're saying life is more than just existing. And it's like, what is the meaning of the life that you're living? And are you really alive and living your best life? And I feel like that so many people are allowing their life to slip away and aren't, really living their best life. And so I feel like this conversation can go so deep, by the way. So I'm just excited to unpack it. And we're not going to go to the end, but I just wanted to say, first of all, it's just a delight and I love what you're doing.
Oh, thank you so much. And yeah, I love that kind of framing of it. And I think it definitely has been my experience in my work that I think my focus has shifted from, like you said, the kind of philosophical or the structural sense of what it means to, be fulfilled towards a more experiential sense of does that actually feel fulfilling for you? And what does your life really look like? And this position of being the author of your own life. I've always been a big fan of this kind of existentialist position of, you get to decide and you get to choose and you also get to experience. So you're always kind of adjusting and then redesigning according to how things are going in that moment.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I feel like there's so many different sort of dreams that people have throughout their life, and their identity sort of evolves. And sometimes, what you ultimately want to be, you sort of are, people are afraid to take the risk and lean into what they genuinely feel like they're called to do. And so, so with that, one of the things that I love to kick off with is a little bit of the origin story. I'd love to know, where are you from? Where did you grow up?
So I am from the UK. I was born in London, and then I grew up between sort of London, Hertfordshire, and then I went to school in Cambridge and university in Cambridge. So I was around Cambridge for a while. Then I went back to London when I started work as a lawyer. And now I just live just north of London. So
nice.
Basically London based, yeah.
Yeah. So what did your parents do for a living?
So my parents were musicians and are still musicians. My mum, she was a classical oboe player. My dad more on the jazz sort of trumpet and also jazz piano side. So super creative people. Lived like a much cooler life than I did in their early 20s in London, just like with loads of art and music and culture around. And really, that was a huge influence on me growing up. So I was always surrounded by lots of music and lots of creative stuff. I did like stage school and dance and drama, as well as a ton of music growing up. And then my parents were music teachers. And so I had a big like academic and educational influence from the music side, but also just being around schools a lot, like waiting for parents to finish work and stuff. So I was always in those kind of environments, both musical and educational.
Oh, that's cool. Did you have any siblings?
Yes, I have a brother, and he is in New York at the moment, actually. So he left to study at MIT a number of years ago, and he's just continued to love it out there. But he went a very different route to me. He's like into stuff I will never ever understand, like quantum physics and fluid dynamics and lots of other terms that I've only read about from his PhD thesis. But he's like, incredibly gifted and intelligent and completely different from me in terms of like the things we gravitated towards.
That's cool. So did you play any instruments when you were a kid? You said your parents were musicians. Did you have any instruments that you played?
Yes. I have tried a few. So piano is probably my main pursuit, and then singing as well. So I did like vocal exams and choirs and things like that. Violin, I gave a good attempt to. Flute at one point, always just picking up different things.
Yeah.
I would say piano was my main preference. And piano, I find, so I was in sort of playing classical piano, and once you're playing that at a very high level, it really teaches you a lot about like discipline, resilience, sort of perfectionism, like that tension between needing to sort of lose yourself in the performance of something in order to become fully immersed and embodied in it, and at the same time having this level of mental control over what you're doing. And I actually found that quite difficult. I mean, it's something that I don't think I've encountered the same in like different pursuits, maybe when I'm like speaking, doing a public speaking event or something. But that feeling of like, you need to kind of lose yourself to an extent in the art and in the music in order for it to be like fully embodied. And at the same time, you need this high level of control. It's a tension that I found quite difficult actually to sort of find in music.
Wow. I love that. I love that, at such a young age, you sort of had this appreciation and almost like a respect for music and the instrument that I think not a lot of kids have that. Their parents want them to play instruments and they're doing it because of their parents are sort of forcing that. And I wonder, like, your parents are musicians, and did that appreciation for how you just described the discipline and really immersing yourself into the music, was that a result of your parents' influence, or was that sort of just kind of part of your DNA?
Yeah, I think like there's something so inherent in me that is like connected to music, but I probably think that is like a very, very early parental influence. Like my dad always says, like when I was born, like the first thing I had, the first like encounter with the world was like him singing to me. So I had like music from literally this like 10 seconds into my life.
Oh, wow.
And I think that definitely, like, you know, if you bring up a child in that kind of environment, and you're just so immersed in music, you know, when I was like a baby, my mum would take me to like oboe lessons that she was teaching. So I'd be like in a like sling on her chest and she'd be like playing the oboe. So stuff like that is like, I think it gets into you in a way that you don't even really appreciate growing up, because music was always just such a huge part of my life. So I think, you know, music, I think now has given me such like a deeper connection with the world, you know, this ability to really feel music and be like immersed in it or be engaged with it, and a connection to art and an understanding of it that I really don't have with any other art. Like if I looked at a painting, I would think like, oh, it's beautiful, but I wouldn't feel like immersed in it in the way that people who have an arts education probably would be able to make that connection. So I feel very fortunate that I do have that with music. Yeah.
That's great. So here in the States, there's a lot of pressure that are put on kids at a very young age, you know, whether it's family or friends, and you get that question, what do you want to be when you grow up? Or what do you want to be? What do you aspire to be? And when you were young, how would you answer that question?
When I was younger, so I mean, music was my initial interest. And when I was about 15, 16, I might have thought, you know, maybe I'll pursue music in some way, like go to music college like my mum did. Then when I was 16, around that age, I had a real shift of sort of teenage rebellion, I guess, and decided I don't want to do anything that my parents were doing. I wanted to have my own path. I wanted like completely start again from the beginning. And so then I chose law was kind of my focus. And I think law for me was really something that in the UK, we don't really study law at school or A level. So it's something that no one has really done before university level. And that was one thing that really drew me to it, because I thought I want to start on like the same ground as everyone else. And I already felt a little bit behind academically because I hadn't been super focused on achievement at school. So I felt like I needed to catch up a little bit. And I thought law is a nice like equalizer. Like people are coming in with no knowledge of the subject and we're all kind of going from the beginning. And, you know, I found it fascinating, all the kind of like how inherent law is to our society and our structure and pretty much everything we do. So I was drawn to law and I wanted to be a solicitor at that point. Yeah.
Wow. So I'm already starting to see some threads between how you approach the piano, the discipline, the rigor, and your desire to want to be a lawyer. Because when you're practicing law, there is a level of discipline that you have to have in terms of the research and how you show up to your clients. And I just wonder, was there any sort of connective tissue between your growing up as I'm going to say a musician, because you were playing multiple instruments and you just sort of came from a family, and I could appreciate that rebellion. I think a lot of teenagers hit that sort of rebellious phase where, you know, you're like, I'm going to live my own life. But I just wonder, when you picked law, was there any connection to your sort of approach to music?
Yeah, I think maybe some similar themes throughout the years. I think one thing I've always really gravitated towards is structure. So things that have like a really firm sense of structure or organization, I think has always really attracted me. Law, obviously, is maybe the most structured thing you can gravitate towards. But even within piano, like I would always go more towards like playing Mozart, for example, rather than Tchaikovsky. And those are like very different types of, they're both inherently structured things, but like Mozart, for example, would follow like a form and a pattern, and you'd be able to see like, you know, the structure of the piece is like very on the surface, whereas other forms of music are much more, you know, like jazz, for example, like improvisation is much less structured, or the structure is different every time. So I think I've always had that sense of like, I really want like a firm foundation under my feet. And that was actually something that I really caused the existential challenges that I had later on, because when I started to question that structure and search for like a more like an overarching structure, I wasn't always able to find it in other things. You know, that's why I had this search for like, what's the meaning of life really?
Yeah.
Because I was like, where is the structure then? If we're not all agreeing on what it is, then like, what is it?
Yeah. So when you decided you wanted to be a lawyer or a solicitor, did you have a conversation with your parents and say, Mom, Dad, this is what I want to do? And how did they react to that?
I think so. Yeah, I think I must have had a conversation with them at some point. I really just wanted to do it all on my own though. So there was no, they weren't really involved in any of it. I'm not entirely sure how I managed to figure it all out on my own. It seems quite impressive looking back.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if I'd be able to do that now. Like, just leave everything and like start again. But I think, you know, when you're 16, you're like, I'm gonna do this completely independently. And yeah, they've always just been supportive, like unconditionally supportive of things that I wanted to do. And I think, you know, they could probably see that I was really going for it. And at that point, yeah, I just went for it.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you grew up in a very supportive household where your parents were supportive of you and your brother. And it wouldn't be surprising if I think if you chose music, they would say, well, that makes a lot of sense. But you chose a pretty solid career and you went through law school, you graduated, and I'm sure they were very happy with your success.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the other thing, I guess, is law is like not exactly a rebellious choice. I mean, that's the thing most people are rebelling out of. If your parents are lawyers, you might be rebelling into music.
Yeah, exactly.
That's probably but yeah, for me, obviously, it was quite, we didn't really have any lawyers in the family or anything. So it was kind of something that was quite new. But yeah, law is a very traditional profession. Obviously, here, like in the UK, it's seen as quite a stable degree choice. So, so yeah, they were fine with that.
Yeah. So what was your first job like?
My first job was in a corporate law firm, actually a US firm. So they had their headquarters in New York, and it was like the UK or the London office of that firm. And yeah, I loved it. Like it was extremely exciting to me to be in that kind of environment, very fast paced, very dynamic, big sort of city life, you know, with lots of travel and international deals and meeting loads of new people and like lots and lots of information very quickly. And US law firms in London, they tend to be a little bit more flat in terms of their hierarchy than the big corporate UK firms, just because they tend to have fewer people. So I was one of just 8 trainees. And so we all had like huge exposure to the business really early on. Whereas, you know, some of my peers at the UK firms were one of 100, you know, so they had a bit more structure in their training. Whereas we were just kind of like, really released into the job. And that was so exciting. And that was exactly like the experience that I wanted to have. So really enjoyed it.
Wow. So how long did you work for a lawyer before you realized that it's not as fun as what the initial job was like? Like there had to be a moment where you're like, okay, this was fun, but it's not becoming fun anymore.
Yeah, I think it was always very interesting to me, the career and the work. And I specialized in corporate tax, which is one of the most legal parts of corporate law, because a lot of corporate law is more like on the deal side, or it actually is quite closely connected to a finance role or a business or an investment role. But tax was very what they call black letter law, which is like very technical kind of like precise law. And I love that, like that related to my law degree, which I'd really, really enjoyed at Cambridge. And so I always enjoyed the work. I think what happened was I was also starting to do other stuff alongside, and I started to enjoy that as much or even more than my actual job. So for lawyers, I'd written this book called The Junior Lawyer's Handbook, and that was published by the Law Society. That was maybe about 3 years into my training as a lawyer. So it was quite early on. And alongside that, I was doing a ton of other writing. I wrote for The Lawyer, which is one of the big legal publications. And I was doing like podcasts and things for law. And I just started to think, oh, I really enjoyed this kind of like teaching and interacting with people and providing that structure. So that's again coming back to like my desire for structure. I wrote this book in order to give other people a sense of structure of how they would progress as junior lawyers. And that I really enjoyed doing that for people, like giving them a framework and giving them information. And working with like working with people more than just working with like, you know, numbers or like contracts.
So what's so interesting, Eloise, is how you just kind of described how you worked in law and you were in corporate tax. It was very structured, which, you know, you were sort of finding your way and learning and getting a lot of experience. But then you almost, once you got a taste of the creativity and writing and sort of having the freedom and the flexibility to sort of be more creative in terms of the work, it's almost like, and I'm going back to the music when you were a kid, that, you know, it's like you're playing the music, but now you're writing the music that other people are playing. And I sort of feel like, you know, that creativity from when you were playing as a musician, as a young kid, it's like now you're an attorney and you're practicing in a big law firm, but you've discovered that you have this talent that is so much more fulfilling than actually doing the work of a lawyer. And what's interesting is that it's sort of like a natural evolution. I've talked to a lot of people who, you know, have this kind of disconnection from the work to the point where it actually begins to make them feel burnt out. And that it wasn't the case for you. You actually like law, but you had sort of like this other draw, which was writing about the field. And that's really, I find really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it is like I think, yeah, there's definitely a sense of creativity in there, or like a desire for creativity. I always see it as like a desire to teach. And maybe that is more of the influence of my parents as well. Like, I come from a family of teachers. Actually, we have so many teachers in our family. Like both of my aunts and uncles are teachers as well. Like my grandparents are also teachers. Like, I think we just I have that sense of like, once I learn something, I want to like conceptualize it and help other people like figure it out. And so it was that desire of like, you know, I was a junior lawyer for a few years. Then I wrote a book about being a junior lawyer. I was like trying to find my purpose. And then I wrote a book about like how I did that and like what I learned. And I think I always have that impulse of like wanting to explain something for other people, like put it into my own words and like provide a resource. I don't know where that comes from.
So you're working as a lawyer and you're doing this for, you said 3 years at this point. You're publishing books and you're providing so much great content and sort of teaching and providing this framework for junior lawyers that are entering the field. When was the moment when you decided you're going to walk away from it?
Yeah, I think it was almost like a slow decision, that one, less so like just an overnight feeling of like I'm gonna just change, and more just I saw other things opening up and I thought I actually thought I'll take a year out and finish this other stuff, and then I'll come back to law, which, you know, I'm actually always open to going back into law. People always ask me, would you go back? And like 100%, if I felt like that was the more fulfilling route and I felt like I'd sort of exhausted everything else that I was doing, I would definitely consider going back, because I do have this sense of connection to the law as a concept or as a discipline. Maybe not back into like the intensity of corporate law, but there are so many different types of law, you know, there's so much to learn and explore. But yeah, I think it was more, there was a part of it that was very practical. So in corporate law, they like you to give 100% of your time and effort and energy towards that particular thing, which is fair enough because you're being paid an extremely high amount to do the job. And so my opinion is that, you know, you really should commit, you know, you're being paid proportionally to your commitment to the job, which I think is fair, if you want to accept that as an employee. And so the part of it was very practical, that I just needed more time to like do other things, and that was becoming not possible or not really that useful to the organization. And then at the same time, just being encouraged by loads of other people who left and it seemed to be doing lots of different things. Like the Great Resignation was actually a crazy time because so many people just shifted were doing different things at the same time. And like, there's a huge power of being in community with other people. And especially after the pandemic, where I had felt quite isolated because I was, you know, I'd gone from this like very fast paced corporate life with all of my friends and like seeing everyone every day to really being quite a lot like on my own. Or like on my own with a housemate. Um, and so I, yeah, was drawn to that power of community. Like we're all kind of going through this together and we're going to make this jump, and people were really like committing to new things. And I thought, yeah, I could do that.
So it sounds like you were going through a transformation at this point where you were you were sort of feeling during the Great Resignation there the world of work was changing. People were sort of having an existential moment where they were realizing that working for a company and spending 100% of your time doing one thing to make money for an organization may not necessarily be the most fulfilling, and people were looking for more flexibility in their work and wanted to have that balance between work and meaning. And it sounds like that was almost like an aha moment for you where you were like, I am going to walk away from this and I know I'll be okay. And I wonder what was the pull? Like what was the thing that pulled you away that you ultimately leaned into?
Yeah, I think people always wanted it to be, or like people were always interested in quite a dramatic story. Because I remember when I left law at the time, because I'd been developing a bit of like a public profile with the books and the articles and the podcasts and things at the time. And I was also quite outspoken on mental health because I already had this interest, which obviously later I followed as a psychotherapist, but I had this interest in like mental health and wellness. And I was also qualified as a yoga teacher and a fitness instructor. So I was like doing sort of mental health type stuff. And I think people wanted it to be like, I left law because I really thought that it like couldn't match up to my values of like health and wellness or something. And I remember like someone at the publication that I was writing for asked me like, could you write a piece about like, I left law because this and that. And I never felt that way about it. I just always felt like I could have stayed. And, if I'd had 5 versions of my life, one of those, I'm sure I would have like fully stayed and pursued law and just seen it all the way through. And there was nothing really incorrect about it. I just had this feeling of like, I knew that my path was going in a different direction. And it was like every time I stayed longer on the law path, I just felt like it was less authentic or less true to like the other path. And I wasn't even really sure what the other path was, and I'm not even really sure now still what it is, but I always felt like every day just felt like another day too long that I wasn't like following the other path. And I had this sense of like disconnect, like my life had kind of split, but I hadn't like gone on the right path yet. And I still had that feeling for a while actually. And what's interesting now is like, even though I still don't really know exactly what I'm doing, I don't have that feeling at all now. Like every day now I don't wake up and think like, oh, I still haven't made the right choice, So there's like a sense of alignment that just happened. And it's really hard to put it into words because I'm not entirely sure what that was even related to, but it was definitely something that I felt, and then it kind of resolved itself.
Yeah. Well, you certainly have a tremendous amount of self-awareness where you really have this feeling of who you are and what you're called to do. And you became disconnected from what you felt like your identity was and what you were called to be. And it's sort of like there's this term called escalation of commitment, where when you invest in something like a law degree and you go to college and you become a lawyer, oftentimes people will escalate their commitment in the work that they're doing, thinking that the result of that will get better and that the reconnection will occur. And what ends up happening is it just you become more and more disconnected, and you realize that instead of working 100%, people are like, oh, I'll work 110% and I'll get partner and then I'll be fulfilled. And you escalate that commitment, which makes it harder to unravel over time. And so the fact that just after a few years, you started to feel that disconnection and you made the choice to pivot and do something different, I think that it's scary, but it's so healthy.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think that is a pattern that I definitely have seen in as a psychotherapist, actually, with people who are struggling with that kind of thing of like, they feel that they can't, it's gone too far, or like the commitment is like you said, escalating over time. And I think for me, maybe I have my parents to thank for this, but I had never really been too driven by money. And that was like a big thing that I think puts a lot of people off, like doing like leaving a corporate organization to do your own thing. And I guess luckily I never really grew up with like, you know, we didn't grow up wealthy. So I never really had the sense of like, I'm losing too much. I always thought like, I'm self-sufficient. I can figure it out. Like, I don't need a huge amount. I don't need to be like, you know, earning this amount of money in order to see myself as successful. I would rather just pursue something that's more meaningful to me. So that was something I definitely had freedom around, which like I had never thought that growing up without money was like a blessing, but in a way, like it gives you that sense of non-attachment to it. And like this feeling that you can figure it out on your own, like my parents did. And like, you know, I saw other people doing as I was growing up.
Yeah. Well, Eloise, I feel like you sort of have a real confidence in your ability to sort of be independent, alone. And where I'm going with this is that it doesn't seem like you have this care of what people think about you either. You know, like your parents are musicians, and their job is all about expression, and you probably learned that at a young age. And while money's not a driver, the other thing is, it's like, I'm going to use a music analogy, is like you march to the beat of your own drum. Like you're not someone who's going to follow in the footsteps or worry about what other people are going to think about you. And I think the combination of the not driven by money, but then also this sort of freedom that I'm going to do what I want and I'm not going to worry about what other people say. Like that is a real gift.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I'm not entirely sure where that comes from. So I do agree. I think it's a gift. And it's not something I have even been that aware of really, because I just have like continued to do. It's only when it's like you can see in comparison to like how it could potentially hold other people back from like doing the things that they really want to do. And I think that's part of my work as an existential psychotherapist, is like really helping people tap into that sense of like knowing, or the sense of connection to yourself. But that was the reason really I was drawn to existential psychotherapy, is because that perspective, which I had always felt was so inherent to just how I saw the world and how I saw myself, that is really at the heart of that field of existential therapy. So when I saw it reflected in like, you know, Viktor Frankl's work, for example, in Man's Search for Meaning, this sense of like being true or authentic to yourself, making your own decisions, responding to the world in the way that you decide, I just thought, oh, that's how I've always felt. And like, it's so validating or reassuring to like find a whole field that is really based around that idea. So I have no idea, again, where that came from, but possibly might need to credit my parents or like early influences or something, but it's definitely something that I hadn't really recognized in myself until I'd started to make these big decisions, and people had said, well, weren't you worried about like, you know, what your friends thought or like what other people were saying? And it had never really just crossed my mind at all to like worry about it.
Isn't that great?
Yeah.
It's so wonderful. Like I love that, because I feel like people grapple with that voice, and that voice gets loud, and it's like, it's hard to quiet that voice. And the fact that the voice in your mind doesn't even exist, I think that's so freaking cool.
That is funny. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I should try and listen to that voice. I've never heard it before. But yeah, I've only ever really had a voice being like, do it.
That's great. So I read in your background, though, that you joined a monastery. Is that true?
Yes. So maybe actually this is where like the kind of self connection comes from, is like my real like theological understanding of the world, or like my beliefs about myself and my identity are really bound up in like what I believe about my connection to God and my sort of religious beliefs. So that I think has played a big role as well. So the monastery experience, that was a 1-year monastic community. It was kind of an experiment that they were running in London of our previous Archbishop Justin Welby. He when he was at Lambeth Palace, he brought monastic communities into the palace to live there essentially. And this was an experiment to see, could monasticism offer something to young people? Like, is there something in that that could inspire young Christians, essentially, to commit further to their faith, or to like find their purpose and connect to themselves and to the community. And so it was a really interesting experiment where he like had these people live in Lambeth Palace. It was a dual track program. So some people were living there, like full monastic community, like real committed community life. And other people, like me, we were in what was called the integrated program, which was where you were just working your regular job. And then you would go into Lambeth Palace every week or twice a week for like community things or like prayer and other engagements. And the whole time you would live by this thing that they called the rule of life, which is like a monastic idea of setting certain principles for your life and then living according to those principles. So your life becomes, again, back to this idea of structure, which again, you can see maybe why it was so attractive to me. But yeah, living life according to a set of principles.
Yeah, that's interesting. So how old were you when you joined?
So that was when I was 20, must have been 26, 27, around that time. So I was still in law at the time, and it was pre-pandemic. So I had actually just got back from working in New York for a while. I worked in I had a secondment out to the head office in New York. When I got back, I just found out about this program. I was recommended it by someone from my church, and I did it for a full year. And then after that, I became part of what they call the dispersed community, which is like where you still live, because obviously monastic traditions generally would be taken for life. Like you would commit to a community for your entire life. And so these kind of like new monastic expressions still have those general principles within them. Like you commit and you're part of the community for life, even if you're not living in the community space.
Were you working still, or did you take a year sabbatical? How does that work?
Yeah, so these kind of, normally you would have to, or you would have to give up your job and, commit to a full lifestyle in a monastery. These kind of expressions of new monasticism, they're calling them like a sort of new ideas of like how you can use monastic principles, but in more modern life situations. They had this ability for you to just continue your job, and at the same time have this commitment or the rhythm where you go into the community space and like every week or twice a week. And also retreats, so silent retreats where you would spend a week, like basically all my annual leave for that year was like in a monastery in silence. But I think doing something like that demonstrates like how much conflict there actually is between monastic values and our modern lives, because once you start thinking, can I apply monastic traditions to the way I'm living right now, you start to see the dichotomy between like how monastic ideals are for someone's life versus like how we're actually living. So for example, one of the principles of monastic living is poverty, which means like not that you need to live in poverty, but you just don't have more than you need and you don't buy more than you actually need to survive, and you're giving away your resources where you have too much, and that kind of sense of like, I'm only going to take what I need. That is very difficult to square with like a corporate career or like a corporate lifestyle in the city. Same with silence. So that was one of our principles, like spending as much time in silence so that you can really hear your own inner voice and your connection to God, or, whatever sort of theological understanding you have of like this connection to the divine. That again is like almost impossible to square with a very intense city lifestyle. So you can see, like, you start to see how difficult it actually is to apply those ideas.
Wow. That's remarkable. There's so many different sort of places I can go with this. First of all, I want to say my daughter's 23 years old. She just graduated college. She started her first job. And I legit want to tell her, in the next 2 years, when you turn 25, you need to join a monastery for a year while you're working.
Yeah.
I'm not kidding. Yeah. I feel like everyone should do that. But the fact that you went and committed to this mission for a year, and I think that the discipline of that decision absolutely contributed to the success that you're having today, the life that you're living, the company that you're running, the Purpose Workshop. All of those things are sort of a culmination of this journey that you were on in your 20s. I believe it's so powerful.
Yeah, I think, well, I would absolutely recommend it for your daughter if she is ever interested. You can tell that, I personally think as a girl in her 20s, it was incredibly transformative for me. Um, yeah, I think you're right. Like, I think actually if it were to be embedded in the curriculum of people's lives, then it gives you like an opportunity to really pause and think like, what is happening here? Because I think one of the things about modern life is that we just have so many distractions that we actually never really need to confront ourselves. And like people can go through their entire lives without really actually confronting or sitting with or accompanying yourself through any of your decisions. And there's this like idea in existential therapy that one of the main principles in the work is to not abandon yourself. So when you're going through like a difficult experience like grief or loss or a change of careers or whatever, like you stand by yourself and you're able to accompany yourself through that. And I think a lot of people now, because we have all these ways to like zone out and detach and like distract ourselves and numb ourselves from like the actual experience of life, people are moving through life with a separation from themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So they're kind of like going through, but they're just on the surface. So they never really like go inwards and like actually look at themselves or like get that deeper connection to what they care about, to what their values are, to what your priorities are, to who you actually are. And I think monasticism is, there's nothing else to do except confront yourself because you're just sitting there in silence most of the time.
Yeah.
So you have to, you're kind of forced into to like look at your life and to look at who you are, and then from there, like that's the hardest bit. But from there, it's like so much freedom because then you can choose like, do I want to continue like this or do I want to make new choices?
Right. Well, I have to say, we were talking about the voice, and when you're sitting in silence for long periods of time over the course of a year, and you're not distracted by the noise of modern life, that you can't escape the voice. And so the fact that you went through that 1 year makes a ton of sense as to why the voice doesn't exist today, because you ultimately really became real with who you are and your identity. And you sort of had that 1 year to work through all of the things that you would ultimately have to work through. And so now you're living this very purposeful life that it's like, I'm going to be me. I'm going to do the things that I want to do, make the decisions, and I'm not going to worry about all these other things. You experience poverty, you experience being alone with yourself. And so at the core, if you can handle those two things, then everything else is going to work out.
Mm. Yeah, I really do believe that the connection to yourself is like the foundation of most things that you do, or like the ability to know yourself. I
Mm,
guess that's the like, oldest philosophy
yeah.
maxim of like just knowing yourself is like the foundation of everything. But it really, my experience that has been true. And I think for me, I went in looking for structure and organization and like the sense of, for a long time, I was really pursuing this idea of like, what is the meaning of life then? Like, what is my purpose? Like, what is it for me? And like, I want to be able to write it down and then just like live it out for the rest of my life. And I think what I learned in my 20s is that it's never going to be that clear, or for most people, it's never really that clear cut. It's not like you're going to have one thing and it just all becomes clear and everything falls into place, but it's like this ongoing evolution of knowing yourself even more and finding out new things and making new decisions. But from the foundation of that, if you can rest that foundation on the connection that you have to yourself, then all of it feels much more structured anyway, because you're coming from this place of integration. Like, you know who you are, and your decisions, even if you make new decisions today and tomorrow and the next day, they're still coming from a place of like connection to yourself.
Yeah.
So that, I think that's the kind of foundation that I found during that time.
Yeah. That's beautiful. So that was 2021. You had this awakening. You went and spent a year in the monastery. And so now it's 4 years later. You founded a company called the Purpose Workshop. And there's a couple of things I'm curious about. Like, how do you earn a living today? I think it's great. People are listening to this and they're like, okay, this is just wonderful. Eloise has this beautifully scripted life where she dabbled herself in the corporate world. She was an attorney and then decided that, she was going to live this purpose-driven life. And I wonder, what does that look like today? And what are some of the challenges that you have to grapple with?
Mm. Yes, I would say there are many challenges of self-employment in life,
Mm-hmm.
or like starting businesses and things like that. Um, I think, and what I would recommend for people as well, leaving a corporate career is like it really helps to have something that is just present in your life as like a tool or a skill that you can monetize quite easily, and that you can just be employed like hourly or doing some kind of skill or training for people. And so for me, that was teaching fitness actually, which has been a big part of like my
Oh,
financial stability over the years. So I trained as a yoga teacher way back in like when I was still in a junior lawyer, just in my holidays because I loved yoga at the time. And then I trained in other disciplines like Pilates and dance and things. And so leaving law, I was able to just step into teaching fitness. And that, even though it wasn't really part of, I didn't really see it as like my mission in life, but it became like a real nice stability for me, even though it was, as you can imagine, quite a step down from a corporate law salary. But like it was enough to make it work and to have some kind of safety, you know, for like mortgage payments or whatever. And then from there, I trained as a psychotherapist. So I've been on a very long training because I've been doing it part time.
mm-hmm.
And that finished in 2023. So that was like a 3-year training that I did. And then right now I am working on a master's in existential analysis, and that finishes next year. So I've been kind of like training alongside, and then starting to build up my psychotherapy practice, which I heard actually Esther Perel, she's like a amazing psychotherapist, very like high profile now. And she was saying on a podcast the other day, like psychotherapy is one of the few careers that you're actually rewarded the older you are. Like the more experience you have, the better it is for your practice. And so I'm a very junior psychotherapist in terms of like how long those careers can be. And so I'm just generally starting to build up my practice, like with a few clients and like, you know, still getting experience. And then the purpose workshop is more on the consultancy side. So I had this book, The Purpose Handbook. That was my second book. It came out in 2021 or two. And that was a book around purpose finding. It was very practical. It had like 16 exercises in it that were like purpose finding exercises that I had found helpful when I was thinking about like, what do I want to do with my career? It's quite, it's quite like practical. It's not super existential. It's very like,
Mm-hmm.
here's something you can try with a pen and paper kind of thing. And around that, I started the consultancy in order to share some of that work with groups or with organizations or with like students, you know, so doing workshops essentially. So yeah, that's kind of where I am at the moment. I'm still like see myself as a bit of a student in existential analysis, which is my field, but starting to like build that up. And my goal, I guess, is to step more fully into the psychotherapy role, like the older that I get.
Oh, that's great. You're creating this amazing foundation at such a young age, and you're taking all the wisdom and experience that you gathered from a decade of working and spending a year in the monastery and just really investing in yourself. And I feel like that foundation is setting you up for some great success. And I think that's terrific.
Yeah. And I think that phrase, like investing in yourself, I think often I come across people who are like, you know, isn't it quite selfish to do all this work? Like it's quite self-centered to like really dive into like, what's my purpose? You know, it's a little bit like that feeling of like turning inward can sometimes feel like it's at the exclusion of turning outward to your community. And maybe people have caring responsibilities, or they got to earn a certain wage for their family and stuff. So it becomes much more complex. And what I always try and emphasize to people is that feeling of like investing in yourself is really fundamental part of your well-being, and not just something that feels like indulgent or like unnecessary, that you're just kind of spending all this time like thinking about yourself. But really, like if you can dedicate the time towards working on yourself, that kind of work seeps outwards into the world. And so then you can give that back in your work, in your community, or like in the interactions that you have with people. But it really starts from that sense of like yourself, like working on yourself and with yourself, and then you can extend it outwards.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. I have a lot of friends who, their life is other people. And if you ask them, what are the top 3 to 5 things that are most important to you? And it's generally things that are outside of who they are as a person. And usually, number one is the family and kids, which they are very important, but you need to invest in yourself. And I sometimes find that people they have this imbalance of making sure everyone else is okay. But then when it comes to themselves and how much time are you spending with yourself and investing in yourself, there's always this imbalance. And over time, you're sort of like, you then begin to feel like when you take time off or when you invest in yourself or when you spend time doing something that pleases you, then shame creeps in and you're like, I shouldn't be doing this. And it's not a fun place to be.
Yeah. And I think that's a cultural thing as well. We're often told, well, you shouldn't really you shouldn't put yourself above other people and you shouldn't dedicate too much time to yourself, or it's seen as a little bit self-centered. But I think when it's integrated with this sense of wanting to be a more full and authentic version of yourself, or the truest version of yourself, and then being able to give that back to other people, I think it really becomes much more of a fundamental wellness tool than something that's just self-indulgent.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Eloise, this has been just a lovely conversation. I feel like the time has just flown by and I could keep talking with you for hours about your journey. And I feel like I'm learning a lot and just relating to what you're saying. And I think people who are in a place where they're not putting themselves first and they're having this sort of internal existential crisis with where they are today, and they feel disconnected from who they really are and what they're called to do. I think your journey and how you're showing up in the world is relatable, but it's so inspiring to for people to be like, wow, I could actually do that.
Well, thank you. Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And I totally relate to that kind of sense of that you mentioned of people feeling that way. And I think the biggest thing that the biggest takeaway that I've had on the journey is it is a really slow, gradual process. And it can be tempting to think these things happen overnight, or you just find it, you wake up one day and you're just kind of there, or you are in your dream life, or you have this sense of what you're meant to be doing. And for me, at least, it's never the whole process feels so uncertain at every stage and so difficult and challenging, and you feel just lost for a lot of the time. But then if you keep that sense of commitment to yourself and to your life, over time you can look back and just see exactly the transformation that it's had on your path. And so I think that sense of just resilience as well is really helpful.
Yeah, no, I think that's so well said. Well, we're going to provide your information in our show notes in terms of how to get in touch with you and your website and your profile and all of your social handles. So I will provide that. I just want to say again, thank you so much. This sheet of music that we scripted here today, I feel was just beautifully done. And I think that people who hear your story will be inspired to make some radical decisions, whether it's a year in a monastery or investing in a completely different career like psychotherapy. I mean, there is just so much, so many nuggets that you shared here today that I think people will be inspired to hopefully make some changes that they need to make in their life.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, I hope so. And to anyone who's listening and feels inspired, just wishing you the best of luck. And yeah, just know that you definitely make the right decisions for yourself when you are connected to yourself.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And thanks everyone for listening. Until next time. Hi, everyone. It's Raymond again here. I want to take a moment and say a special thanks to our sponsor, Career Minds. They're a global provider of workforce solutions. And if you like what you're hearing on the show, we'd love for you to take a moment and click follow on your favorite podcast app. And while you're there, please leave us a rating or review. It really helps new listeners find the show. And you can also watch the full episode on YouTube. Just search for Clocking Out with Raymond Lee and hit subscribe. And if you're listening on Spotify, don't forget to check out our episode polls and drop us a comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Finally, if you or someone you know has a story that they want to share about navigating change, taking a risk, or rethinking their career, we want to hear from you. Head to the link in our show notes and fill out the form to be considered for a future episode. Until next time, remember, if you're sitting there and you're just stuck or unsure of your career or future, and you think it's time for a change, I would encourage you to ask these 3 questions. Does my career or work make me feel alive? Am I doing the things that matter to me most? And am I creating value for myself and for others? Until next time.